What I was just asking John as kind of a summary question before we turn to the group was, so which has done more damages, the terrorist attack on September 11 or our American reaction to the terrorist attack?
That's a loaded question.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for waiting. I'm sorry I was running late, first of all. I think the way I would answer that question is that the whole point of terrorism is to terrorize. The terrorism does not have a conventional military objective. What it's trying to do is provoke a response from a society. That's what terrorism has always been throughout history. People call it asymmetric warfare, but I don't even think that's the right term to use, because it implies that it's a form of warfare. It's just political theater designed to provoke. Throughout history, it's always been a way in which an aggrieved minority or aggrieved part of the society can get an outsized response from the majority. In the case of Al-Qaeda attacking the United States, it wasn't even an indigenous terrorist group. Most terrorist groups throughout history have been an indigenous part of society, and that's why it's usually in the cases where it's an indigenous organization, part of an ethnic group or some other form of minority, in which it actually has lasting power and lasting effect, because there's an actual base in the population that supports the viewpoint of that terrorist group. And so that was the inherent weakness of Al-Qaeda attacking the United States. There was no indigenous support to speak of inside the United States for Al-Qaeda. It was not like the IRA, which had in Ireland, a large base of support for what they wanted to do, or the PLO in the West Bank or whatever. And so I always thought Al-Qaeda had this inherent weakness in its attacks on the West. There was no real support in the West for what they were doing. There was no real support in the Arab world for what they were doing either. And so I always compared Al-Qaeda to the anarchists of the 19th century. To me, that's the closest parallel in history to what Al-Qaeda was. Al-Qaeda is really a rebellion against modernism. It's not a rebellion against a state in any sense. The anarchists of the 19th century basically were rebelling against the Industrial Revolution. Mm-hmm. And they used assassination and small bombings in Europe and the United States to make whatever point they had. And their problem was they didn't really have a point in what they were doing. Al-Qaeda didn't really have a point. And unless you want to believe that they want a global caliphate. But it's such a fantasy world that they've lived in that they didn't, I think it's fair to say, they didn't have a real political strategic aim in anything that they were doing. And so I think to look at it in those terms, it makes it easier to understand all they were really trying to do in real terms was provoke us. Mm-hmm. And they did a damn good job of that. And that's why I think the response that we have had to this has been far worse from our point of view than what the original attack was. Mm-hmm. Because we have transformed our society in response to a group that never really represented a serious threat to us in any meaningful way. And they were like the anarchists, meaning they could inflict small attacks and they could kill some people, but there was no great point to it. There was no real political threat, mm-hmm. and there was no existential threat to the United States. And so what we have done in creating a massive national security infrastructure in response to terrorism is, in my opinion, far in excess of what the threat was.